Joining me now is Tim Canova. He's running in Florida's 23rd district. You might remember the name of the incumbent in that district. Her name is Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. There's a bit of a rematch. Tim, welcome to Rebel Headquarters.
Thank you, Cenk. Appreciate it.
All right. So Tim, you're running as an independent. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. I want to talk about your policy issues in a minute. But first, Let's talk about Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. In the Sun Sentinel, you were quoted as saying that she is the kiss of death. She's the albatross around this party and a menace to Florida, the nation, and the world. Pretty strong language. Why do you think that?
Well, I think it's pretty accurate. I think she did prove to be an albatross around Hillary Clinton's neck in the state of Florida, which was a pivotal state in the presidential election. I think for every Democratic voter that she might have attracted to vote for Hillary in, let's say, Blue Broward County, she lost a lot of votes outside of the blue sections of Florida. As far as a menace to Florida, she's really the epitome of the corporate machine here. She's been taking millions of dollars, and that's not an exaggeration, from some of the largest predatory interests, including payday lenders, Wall Street banks, the fossil fuel industry, even private prison companies. Recently, she's been attacking the private immigration detention centers under Trump, and yet she was taking money from the Correction Corporations of America while pushing a $100 million private immigration detention center in her own district. She's a drug warrior. She says that marijuana is a gateway drug. You know, she represents mass incarceration. She takes money from the big sugar industry and big agricultural interests, which are contributing to really a growing environmental crisis right now in the state of Florida. We see these blue-green toxic algae tides that are fouling the drinking water, certainly fouling the waterways and killing an awful lot of wildlife, hundreds of sea turtles and manatees, and it's a growing problem here in Florida.
So Tim, I think the most common and interesting question here, legitimately so I believe, is why you're running as an independent. Why not just take her on in the Democratic primary?
That's a great question, and we ran as a Democrat 2 years ago, and we ran quite a great grassroots campaign. We raised millions of dollars in small donations online. In fact, we broke records for the highest percentage of small donations online for any federal campaign in history. And we put that money back into the field. We had 4 field offices, and we created an army of hundreds of volunteers and field organizers. We were knocking on 10,000 to 12,000 doors a week, and our internal field numbers showed a very different result than the official result. It showed us actually winning the race. And that was our experience on the ground wherever we went. So after the race was over, after the votes were counted, so to speak, I asked to see the ballots, and we put in a public records request to inspect all the paper ballots in our race. The supervisor of elections, who's a close ally of Wasserman-Schultz, stonewalled us for months. I finally brought a lawsuit. While the lawsuit was pending, the supervisor destroyed all of our paper ballots, and those were clear violations of state and federal criminal statutes. I mean, actual felonies. At the time, and I should say that's not an opinion. I mean, this was clearly established to the point where the supervisor admitted it in videotape depositions, and the Florida Circuit Court granted a summary judgment in our public records request and ruled that the supervisor had indeed violated these criminal statutes. So I wrote to all of the Democratic Party officials in Broward County and Miami-Dade and in Tallahassee with one simple request: to just join me in calling for an investigation. I did not get a single reply from any of these Democratic officials. So here I am looking at the silence that comes from the party officials, comparing it to this new generation, millennials and younger, who were anything but silent in the aftermath of the Parkland shootings. And most of those millennials and younger are now non-party affiliation. 70% of them, they say, are now independent. And I had a choice. I could run in a Democratic primary in a very Democratic district. There's only 24% Republican registration in this district. And when you run in a Democratic primary, as I found out the last time, you're basically marginalized by the party. They protect the incumbent. They shower her with a lot of corporate media attention and a lot of corporate money. They allow her to dodge debates. And they just throw up roadblocks everywhere. And then the final straw was they don't even seem to care when paper ballots are destroyed. And I also asked to see the software, to inspect the software of the electronic voting machines and the electronic scanning machines, you're not allowed to inspect the software because it's considered proprietary. It's owned by the private vendors that are hired by the supervisor of elections. So, we don't really know what to believe as far as the outcome of the last race. I thought by running as an independent, it puts me on the ballot in November instead of a late August closed primary with a very low turnout. All those millennials and younger can now vote. And it really widens the kind of conversation that we can have on the issues. We're not really tied down to sort of the Democratic Party catechism and talking points. We can talk to all of the voters about a wide range of issues. And again, because it's such a gerrymandered district, there's very little chance that a Republican's going to win a three-way race.
So, Tim, how much did you lose by, according to the official count?
According to the official count, 13 percentage points, about 6,000 votes.
Yeah, so do you think that there's really some chance that they just stole it? Like, don't get me wrong, I think the shredding the paper documents is outrageous, right? And
yes.
And the whole idea that these voting machines are proprietary and so no citizen can actually verify the vote is maddening and completely unacceptable. But do you think that they actually rigged the vote so that you would have won otherwise?
My gut tells me they did. I'm sorry to say. Who commits felonies by tearing up paper ballots, by destroying them while litigation is pending, while they're the subject of litigation, if they're not trying to hide something? Our internal field numbers, based again on 10 to 12,000 door knocks a week and 2 to 3,000 phone calls a week, where we would rank the voter engagement in the Van voter database, it showed us running away with it. It wasn't even close at the end. And all of the early voting sites and election day sites that I went to, it was the same experience that I had and that many others did. I got to tell you, Wasserman-Schultz's name recognition is very high, like it is all over the country. But even here in this district, I think her name recognition works against her at this point. So, if it's possible to either hack these machines or to manipulate the software of the machines to get a desired outcome, well, why wouldn't they do that if they could get away with it so easily?
So the one thing we most certainly agree on is that they should not be able to get away with it, whether it's in the middle of Kansas that just happened a couple of weeks ago or any other race. We should not have private companies running our voting machines and then telling us we're not allowed to verify them. That is obvious.
Agreed.
Unfortunately, it's not obvious to anyone actually running the elections. So let's talk about your policy issues real quick. I did not know that you picked avocados on a kibbutz in northern Israel. That's fascinating.
I did.
Yeah, but are you questioning the U.S. support for Israel, and if so, how?
Well, I was critical of Israel's firing into Gaza with live rounds, and Wasserman-Schultz has not uttered a word of criticism of Israel. I must say it's painful for me to reach the conclusions that we have to put some pressure on Israel and the Netanyahu government. I did work on a kibbutz when I was in my early 20s, and I've been back to Israel half a dozen times. I come from a blended family with a Jewish stepfather, grew up in a neighborhood that was very Jewish. And from the very first time I went to Israel, I felt a strong affinity for the Israeli people. But I do think it's important to separate one's affinity for people of a country with the actual government policies. And I've never been a fan of Benjamin Netanyahu from all the way back when he was the finance minister and putting Israel on perpetual austerity programs. So yes, I do think the US has a role to play to bring both these sides together. In the last campaign, I made a point of talking about the need for regional and global disarmament talks. And Wasserman-Schultz attacked me for it. She tried to make it sound like I wanted to unilaterally disarm Israel. I think you take a look at these wars of regime change from Iraq to Libya and Syria, and it's like a nonstop, perpetual bloodbath where it seems like not just the United States, a lot of powers that manufacture conventional weapons and trade them are making a fortune on every side of all of these wars, and it has to stop. When I was growing up, it was very common a big part of the agenda, I should say, of the United States was disarmament talks. Of course, we were talking about strategic nuclear weapons and talks with the Soviet Union. But I think it's time to have these kinds of talks globally and to start talking about converting conventional arms industries to civilian use all over the world, not just in the United States. we have to find a way for countries and people to settle their disputes in a much more peaceful way than we're seeing.
So, Tim, we only have about a minute left, and so I know that you have the standard progressive positions, Medicare for all, campaign finance reform,
Yes.
et cetera. So I wanted to ask about one other thing, which was regulating payday lending. So Wasserman-Schultz does take donations from that industry, but how would you regulate them?
Well, I think they should be regulated very strictly. I think much lower interest rates. In Florida, we're talking about 300% and higher. Now, I've been a law professor for many years. I've been tenured for over 15 years, and my area of study and scholarship has been financial regulation in the Federal Reserve and financial markets. I'm all for postal banking, for instance. I think there's ways to serve the poor communities and the low-income communities, like this country did from the 1930s to the 1960s, where the postal system actually had low-cost checking for citizens. We should be moving in that direction. Public banking is a great alternative to predatory payday lending. I don't think there's really a place for that kind of exploitation of very low-income folks the way Wasserman-Schultz apparently embraces.
All right, the website is timcanova.com. Tim, thank you so much for joining us on the Young Turks Network. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.